Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Sudan's military suspends delicate talks with protesters in bringing in civilian rule, demanding that roadblocks in the capital first be taken down. This after at least 9 people are injured in a heavy-handed response by security forces. Also, at least 17 Nigerian soldiers are killed in a devastating ambush. No one's yet claimed responsibility for the attack near the Malian border. And Zimbabwe's president sacks his Minister of Energy as public frustration grows amidst the worst rolling blackouts to hit household in years. But first, Sudan's military rulers suddenly suspended fragile talks with protest leaders on Wednesday night. They are demanding that demonstrators first take down roadblocks that have been put up in parts of Khartoum. The ultimatum came after at least 9 people were earlier injured by security forces. Generals running the country in the wake of the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir last month have been meeting civilian representatives for weeks now. They were on the brink of hammering out the final details of a deal on a transitional authority. The two sides had earlier agreed to the makeup of a legislative council and a 3-year transitional period. All that has been put on hold. Nadia Massi joins us now from the Sudanese capital. Nadia, this all came out of the blue. What can you tell us about the suspension of negotiations?
This was supposed to be the night where Sudan's transition to democratic rule was finalised. We heard yesterday from the military council telling us they were extremely close to finalising that deal with the opposition. That announcement would be made tonight. Everything was looking smooth enough until very recently when we heard from a speaker from the opposition saying that nothing's going to happen until roadblocks that are surrounding the sit-in in the capital city, Khartoum, here, are taken down by protesters. Now, protesters certainly aren't going to be in a hurry to do that. Every time you interview a protester here, the one thing they say is "sabinna" in Arabic, which means we're staying in the streets until we get civilian rule. So don't expect this to be an easy task for the military.
So some of that frustration and that defiance has probably not been helped by some of the violence that was reported earlier on Wednesday. Do you have any idea of what was behind that unrest?
Well, from what we understand from protesters we were speaking to at the frontiers of the sit-in earlier on this evening, they say it was actually the military and a number of allied militias who were going around trying to dismantle parts of those barricades, and clashes ensued when those barricades were trying to be removed. We spoke to a number of protesters who told us that live fire was shot at them by what they said was militiamen. Now, this is the militia, the RSF, loyal to the old regime in Sudan. And the protesters claim they know it was them because they're very distinctive. They're easy to spot. They wear a particular uniform. They've got a red hat that makes them easy to identify. But whether it is the militia or the army itself that is carrying out these attacks on protesters that we saw today and 2 days ago as well, it's clear what their strategy appears to be: to squeeze the area that the protesters control by taking down those barricades. So it looks like there is no end in sight to the tensions and the hostility here in the Sudanese capital this evening.
Thanks very much. Nadia Massi there for us in Khartoum. Now, 11 Nigerian soldiers were still missing on Wednesday after 17 of their comrades were killed a day earlier in an ambush on their patrol along the Malian border. No one's yet claimed responsibility for the attack, but several jihadist groups do operate in the area. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
It's one of the worst attacks against Niger's soldiers in recent years. There was a first attack on Monday against the Koutoukale prison near Niamey, where many jihadists are detained. The army then pursued the attackers towards the north and the border with Mali. That's where the deadly ambush took place Tuesday.
We had some of our soldiers posted near the border with Mali who were trying to stop the attackers. That's when one of our vehicles exploded on a mine, and at the same time the attackers opened fire on our troops.
The opposition says governments in Niger and neighbouring countries are not doing enough to fight jihadists.
I believe all the governments in the Sahel region are not doing enough to retaliate against this threat. They are not providing the necessary means. All these governments have failed to go inside the terrorist den to destroy their capacities and destroy their funding, which depends on narco-terrorism.
The attack took place near this village of Tongo Tongo. That's where 4 American soldiers and 5 soldiers from Niger were killed in October 2017. The Islamic State and the Greater Sahara claimed responsibility for that attack. In a bid to defeat jihadists, both France and the US have military bases in Niger.
In Zimbabwe, President Emmerson Mnangagwa has sacked his Minister of Energy as public frustration grows amidst the worst rolling blackouts to hit households in 3 years. This week, the state power company imposed scheduled power cuts that run for up to 8 hours a day. The outages are adding to the difficulties linked to the country's deep economic crisis. Ryan Truscott tells us more from Harare.
There was certainly some excitement when this new minister was announced. It's the former Deputy Transport Minister, Fortune Chassi, and he's popular with many Zimbabweans, mainly because he's very easy to engage with on social media. But he himself tweeted that this new job won't be a walk in the park. One of his first tasks may have to be to arrange for power imports from Zimbabwe's neighbors, namely Mozambique and South Africa. But I've spoken to industrialists who say that Zimbabwe's power charges are too low, and the country can't expect to provide sustainable power if it's not charging viable prices for it.
So these blackouts are all part of a generally uncomfortable landscape for Zimbabweans. They've been having to deal with blackouts for years. How are they coping with this latest round of outages?
Well, in Harare, most suburbs are going for 8 hours a day without power. I spoke to an official from the Harare Residents Trust, and he told me that these power cuts are hurting poor households the most because they're having to fork out for things like gas and firewood and paraffin to light and heat their homes. It's the start of the Southern African winter here, so those things are very much in need. And of course, there's a negative effect on industry. I spoke to the head of Zimbabwe's main industrial confederation. He says his group will lobby the government to spare industrial areas from the cuts. He says if companies lose production time, then they'll have to pass on that cost to consumers, and that will fuel price instability.
Now, all this is compounding the country's economic problems. But on Wednesday, we heard the finance minister saying that the Zimbabwean economy actually grew more than expected last year. Has that apparently made much of an impact on the day-to-day lives of most Zimbabweans?
Well, most Zimbabweans are really feeling the pain of rising prices. We heard today that annual inflation has now risen to more than 75%, though independent economists say that's a conservative estimate and that it's more like 200%. And as public workers' wages are eroded, as well as private sector wages, so you get greater potential for labour unrest. And the main opposition MDC has hinted at protests after their elective Congress later this month. So with these levels of frustration and anger, things don't look good.
Ryan Truscott there for us. Now, Microsoft has joined the list of tech giants ramping up their investment in Africa. It's opening up an Africa Tech Development Centre in 2 sites, one in Kenya and one in Nigeria. That's just to start with. And it's all part of a plan to channel around $100 million into the continent over the next 5 years or so. Engineers will build applications using artificial intelligence, mixed reality and machine learning. And Microsoft says that the benefits will go beyond its own potential profits. Its proximity to local engineers and entrepreneurs could help in tailoring development that reflects the specific African context and contribute to the continent's economic growth.
The future of the war in terms of labor workforce is here in Africa, and we started working about the infrastructure that was needed in order to untap that opportunity and give the opportunity for all the African continent in order to do the bridge in the digital scale. At that standpoint, we're talking about $100 million investment in between infrastructure people. But the most important part is not about that. It's the ripple effect that we will create in the ecosystem with the university, with the governments, and with the startups. For every person, there will be many that will work in internship programs, in development programs, that we will be able to enable for the local economy. And that's where we care the most.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.